Hello friends, welcome back to another video. I have been moving piles of books around all day because I'm doing an unhaul. So this is like, I think it's going to be kind of fun because this is going to be like an extreme throwback unhaul because this was essentially like teenage Grace's bookshelf. And I needed the space because I have a lot more recent books that I want to fit on my shelves that need that space. And I have a lot of books here that I haven't 100% decided whether I'm going to be getting rid of them or not, or selling them or like storing them. I know that my mom likes to keep a lot of my childhood books, which is cool. But regardless, they're not going to be on my shelves. I have purged them so that I can feel fresh and my collection is up to date. So let's get into it and see some of these books that I am going to get rid of. I really do want to start us off with a classic, let me tell you. What could be more 2009 than this? Yeah, the Twilight saga, I think I read it when I was like 12 or maybe 11 for the first time, and I probably read it like 3 times in that span until I was maybe 14. These have gotten enough love, like these hardbacks. They're still in okay condition, but it really is unfortunately time for them to go because they are never going to get read again in this house. Next up, we have some honestly adorable books that I ate them up as like a teenager, and that is the Magic in Manhattan books. So there's, oh my god, there is Bras and Broomsticks, Frogs and French Kisses, Parties and Potions, and Spells and Sleeping Bags. Actually, I think that Spells and Sleeping Bags is the third one, and Parties and Potions is the fourth one. Guys, I loved these books when I was a teenager. Like, I love the idea of like a teenage girl like realizing that she's a witch, realizing that she has powers, and like all the shenanigans that ensue. But again, like, I'm not gonna read, like, if I reread these now, I would just be looking at them with a critical eye, and I don't want to do that. I just want to remember them as like a little bubble of happiness in my memory, you know? Next up, we have 3 books, a series that I debated getting rid of or keeping, and that is the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. And like, I still think that these books are probably good, but I just don't think that I want to reread them, and that's pretty much the entire reason. But like, the hardcovers are in good condition, so that's the type of thing where like I could maybe sell those, or I could keep them and just like maybe store them somewhere else that's not on my main bookshelf. But they did get cleared out in the purge. Next up, I have a couple of books that I actually read this year, and that is going to be Room by Emma Donoghue and The Disappearance by J.F. Friedman. These books are different from each other. The only reason that I'm grouping them is because they are both like, they're kind of in rough shape. They're not books that I loved. Like, I really liked The Disappearance when I read it, but it is a mystery and I didn't like it enough that once I know the outcome, I want to go back and reread it. And then Room, I didn't love, unfortunately. I just kind of was more lukewarm on it, and I know for sure that I'm not going to read it again. So those as well, I kind of wanted just off my shelf to give me a little space. Next up, we have a couple of absolutely classic teenage picks, and that will be Paper Towns by John Green and The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So these were my I'm an angsty teenage girl books, and I love John Green. Not that I think that these books are bad, it's just that I read them at that time in my life that I would have enjoyed them, and I did enjoy them when I read them. Like, I loved John Green's books as a teenager, but I know that I would not hold the same opinion now, and so reading them again just doesn't seem like a good idea because I would not have that same lens at all. Next up, we have this copy of Pride and Prejudice, where I have 2 copies of Pride and Prejudice, and I like the other one better. So. Then we have a No Fear Shakespeare version of Macbeth, which would have been for grade 10 English. Yeah, we've got some nice little highlights and annotations going on in there. So this one is probably one that I would have to get rid of. I mean, it has all of my writing in it, so I doubt that somebody's going to want it. But I think that this was great for me at the time, but now I would want to read Shakespeare like in its natural habitat instead of having it like translated, so to speak, for you. But I still think that these books are like absolutely invaluable as a resource for like teenagers that are just learning Shakespeare for the first time, because it can be so jarring to try and understand that type of writing. Next up, we have the Darkest Powers trilogy, which is the Summoning, the Awakening, and the Reckoning by Kelly Armstrong. And this is another one of those where like I read it as a teenager. I think that this has like sort of like a magical orphanage for kids with all sorts of weird stuff going on, and our main character can see ghosts, and she meets like a werewolf, and she meets people with other abilities. To be honest with you, this series kind of feels like a fever dream, because I feel like I have the most vague idea of what happened in it without actually remembering any of the details of what happened in it. I feel like this was probably a decent enough introduction into fantasy for me as like a younger teenager, even though I doubt that I would enjoy it now, because I think it's pretty heavy on the romance. And while I don't mind at all having romance in my fantasy, it's generally not what I want the main focus to be. But, you know, if anybody knows anything about these books, you can feel free to let me know in the comments what you think of them. I guess I could have shown this earlier when we were doing Twilight, but I also have The Host by Stephenie Meyer, which I liked more than Twilight, if I remember correctly. This is a really interesting concept explored in this book about like aliens kind of climbing inside human bodies and essentially just taking us over, but like our appearance stays the exact same, except for I believe it's like a ring around your iris, which I think is like what's being shown on the cover here. But I don't really remember. I think I read this a few times too. I think that like the whole concept is that there's an alien that takes over the body of a person, but this person had like people who cared about her, and she was on the run with them, and she ends up like they as like a pair, the host and the parasite, I guess you could call it, they go find these people and they actually live amongst them, even though there is an alien in this woman. So I actually think that The Host is probably a good book that I might even like now, but I don't see myself ever really having the desire to reread it, and it is a pretty hefty book that takes up a lot of space on the shelf, so it's gotta go. Next up, I have a sort of miscellaneous pile, the first of which is The Weaver by Emmy Itäranta, and this one is about this island. It is a fantasy, and it explores this island where the main character, Eliana, is what's called a weaver. But the thing is that this main character has the ability to dream, which is actually like an outlawed concept on the island. Nobody is allowed to dream, so she kind of gets involved with she eventually gets involved with this like underground society, and things kind of spiral from there. To be honest, I don't remember that much about this book, but it was good and I liked it when I read it, but it's not the type of thing that stuck with me, and I don't see myself revisiting it. Next up, we have The Lucky One by Nicholas Sparks, which is, I mean, just as it being like a very classic romance, well, not classic in like the sense that it's a classic, but just in, like, I guess maybe more of a typical romance. Like, we all kind of know what a Nicholas Sparks movie is like. So this is one where once I know the story and know the outcome, it's not something that I would reread. Next up, we have Conversion by Catherine Howe. And this is an interesting one because this deals with some teenage girls who live in, I believe, a town where witch trials used to take place, and in this town some really creepy and unsettling things start to happen around these girls. And I was hoping that this was going to be more supernatural and fantastical than it actually ended up being. So I still think that this was good, and maybe I would have a different viewpoint if I read it again, but I didn't love it because it didn't exactly go the route that I was hoping that it would take. Next up is Every Day by David Levithan. Am I saying that right? I'm not sure. But the essential concept of this book is that this is a person who wakes up in a different body every single day. So I think that it's impossible to know people and to build connections that will last from day to day, because every day you wake up in a different body, and therefore everyone else won't know who you are and will see you as different every single day. I honestly don't remember too much about this book aside from that, and it just didn't leave an impression on me. It is a really interesting concept, like waking up in a new body every day, but I just don't remember what the book was about, and I don't ever see myself revisiting it. Next up, we have The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, which I actually did quite enjoy this when I read it, but this is in the same vein as other mysteries where once I know what is happening and what the mystery was, I'm not going to revisit it because it wasn't that gripping to me in other ways. It was really like the mystery that was pulling me along, and then once you know, and there's no going back. Next up, we have a real throwback, and that is Miles to Go by Miley Cyrus. Her memoir or autobiography. I'm not exactly sure what this would be considered. She wrote this one when she was pretty young. I mean, I do like the title Miles to Go because of that idea, but this is one where I kind of have like some warm fuzzy feelings attached to it, so I'm not sure whether I will get rid of this, but I don't want it to sit on my shelf either. So next up we have an Agatha Christie book called The Hollow, which is a Hercule Poirot mystery, and this one is just, like, I really like Agatha Christie, and I do have like, I think 5 or 6 of her books on my shelf, but The Hollow just wasn't my favorite storyline. It really wasn't my favorite, like, cast of characters. I still thought that it was good, but I thought it was mostly like good to okay. So again, knowing the outcome of the mystery, I'm never going to be rereading this one. Next up is Don't Sweat the Small Stuff for Teens, which I might find a way to pass on to someone else in my life, like maybe a family member or something who is still a teenager, because this book is not exactly aimed at me anymore. Ooh, next up we have another classic angsty teenager book, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which I just know that I have highlighted the heck out of this book. Part of me doesn't even want to get rid of it, because I feel like if I read this, I would have such a new perspective on the content in here. It's such a tiny book. Should I just keep it? You know what, I think we just saved one of these books. Next up we have Confessions of a Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella, which I feel like is an absolute like modern classic, like with a very like cute fluffy book, but it has been a really long time since I read this. I barely remember anything about it other than the general concept of like your female main character struggling financially but also being a shopaholic. But I just know that I'm, like, this isn't the sort of book that I am wanting to read, and I just know that I'm not super interested in it, so RIP. My foot fell asleep and I was forced to change positions. Next up we have Something Borrowed by Emily Giffin, which this is the movie cover. I feel like this movie is probably more famous than the book, maybe? I'm not sure. But this is in the same vein as Confessions of a Shopaholic, where this just isn't the type of book that I like to read anymore, so it goes on the pile. And literally the same can be said about Mini Shopaholic. Next up, we have Beautiful Creatures by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stoll, and I never actually read this book. This is like probably one of my first ever DNFs. I tried to read this, I got a little bit of the way into it, and it just wasn't doing it for me. Also, I hate movie covers, and this is absolutely terrible. Like, this cover literally gives me physical pain to look at. So I'm very sorry, Beautiful Creatures, but you're not beautiful, and I am saying goodbye. And then finally, we have a bunch of books by Elizabeth Chandler. We have Dark Secrets #1, which implies that there is a Dark Secrets 2, which I may have owned at one point, but I don't remember. And this, I think, is a collection of short stories, or at least I remember there being more than one narrative in this book, so I don't know whether it's just split into 2 or... Oh no, it actually is split into 2, because I'm very smart and I can see that there are 2 titles there on the cover. Yes. So this is another one where, like, I really enjoyed them as a teenager. These very much had like supernatural vibes, and the same thing can be said for Kissed by an Angel, and this one has 3 stories: Kissed by an Angel, The Power of Love, and Soulmates. So this one has 3 stories in it, and I do believe that they're all different because, or maybe this one is actually a trilogy. These just have very supernatural vibes. Like, they deal a lot with like reincarnation and ghosts and like creepy goings on that actually does turn out to be supernatural things, instead of just like exploring that but not diving into the fantastical side of it. So I really did like, I feel like you can see a trend here where like this was my kind of jumping off point into fantasy, because I really liked those elements, and that is what I was interested in. And then finally we have Everlasting, which says that it's the sequel to Ever Crossed, but it's a Kissed by an Angel novel, and Kissed by an Angel was the book that was just there. Well, this implies that I would have read Ever Crossed, because I definitely read this, and this is the sequel to something, so I don't really know where that other book is. But I will quickly give you a count of these. So that is 35 books that I am unhauling. It honestly is kind of fun to go back through these and see how my taste in reading has evolved. I mean, it has been like 10 years at least since I read some of these books, but they do have fond memories for me. They are just not the type of thing that I read anymore. So I hope that you found this fun. I find it very cleansing to get rid of these, even though I'm not certain that all of them are going to be completely gone from my life. But yeah, let me know what you thought in the comments of this unhaul. It was very satisfying for me personally, and that is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content from me, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!